Okay, so the first thing we are going to review today or go over is our rules for multiplication and division sign rules. Great handwriting, isn't it?
It's beautiful.
Get used to it. Multiplication and division sign rules. Okay, so when we talk about our sign rules, I'm talking about the sign of the number. So you know how we can have positive numbers and negative numbers. That's what we're looking at, the sign of the numbers. So when we first went back to multiply numbers, when you were in third grade, you'd multiply numbers like 3 times 4. Well, what was the sign of both of those numbers?
Positive.
You know now that there was a positive number. So when you multiplied positive 3 times positive 4, what was the sign of your answer?
Positive.
It was also positive. So your first rule is when you multiply two positives, your answer is positive. Right? What about when you divide two positives? Your answer is positive. So these rules apply for both multiplication and division. All right? Now the next one. What happens if you multiply a positive number by a negative number? It's correct. Your answer is negative. All right, what about a negative number times a positive number? That answer is also negative. Very good. And then what happens when you multiply a negative number times a negative number? Your final answer is positive. So those rules are the only rules you need when learning about the signs of multiplication and division. Do those look familiar to you? Seen them before? Okay, good. Okay, so let's just work a 3 examples. Well, we'll do a few multiplying, and then we're going to do a few division. So what happens if I multiply 2 times 3? Let's say positive times a positive. So my answer is positive. 2 times 3 is 6. Yes. Okay. Now what if I multiplied 3 times negative 4? That's a positive times a negative. So we know our answer is negative. 3 times 4 is 12. Now what if we multiplied negative 5 times negative 5? Which one is it? We multiply negative times a negative, our answer is positive, and 5 times 5 is 25. So that should be positive 25. All right, and then what if I were to multiply negative 3 times 0? Is it 0 or is it negative 0?
0.
That's right. There's no such thing as negative 0. All right? 0 is just 0. So very good. Any questions on those? Now, a couple things I want to talk about in regards to multiplication. How did I show that I was multiplying? How did I show I was multiplying in all of these problems? Yeah, you knew what the question was, you cheater. Yeah, very good. I showed multiplication by parentheses. All right? In the first example, 2 times 3, notice the number was right beside the parentheses. Anytime you see that, that means to multiply. Here, this number's by parentheses, but then there's this negative. So that's kind of a little trickier because that could look like subtraction. But just remember, if the number is right beside the parentheses, I always multiply. All right? What about the next example? What's touching there? 2 parentheses. Well, what does it mean if 2 parentheses are touching? That also means to multiply. Okay? It's the same thing. So when you have 2 parentheses touching with no sign between them, that means to multiply. Very good. Now, the reason I brought that up is this is the way you're going to show that you are multiplying 99% of the time. Okay, the days of doing multiplication like this are over. Okay? I don't want you to ever write that down. Why would I not want you to use this for multiplication?
Because you'll have numbers in pre-algebra and letters in pre-algebra.
Absolutely. In pre-algebra, algebra, every math you ever take from here on, we use variables to represent unknown quantities. But what variable do we use the most? X. So this looks just like an X. So is he multiplying? Is he writing an X? I don't know. He's real sloppy the way he writes. It's hard to tell. Okay? So you'll never see me write to multiply like this. The only exception is if you deal with scientific notation. So if you're ever in science class or sometimes in math, we'll talk about scientific notation. Have you seen that before? In that, the notation has a times in it like that. I don't really like it, but that's the only time that you'll ever see me use it. Okay? Another way, what's another way that we sometimes show multiplication? We've got parentheses, we've got X's.
With a dot.
With a dot, yeah. So sometimes you could see this, 3.4. All right? It looks fine there. The problem is, what if I had 3.8? Was that a dot I drew, or is that two negatives that I drew? I drew it real fast, right? It's still hard to tell. So we try to take all the confusion out of it. You'll rarely use a dot. You will never use an X, except for scientific notation. 99% of the time, you're going to see me use parentheses, and you should do the same. Let's do a couple of division problems. So what if I had 8 divided by -2? Okay, look at our signs. A positive divided by a negative is negative. 8 divided by 2 is 4. Very good. Okay, what if I had 6 divided by, let's do -6 divided by -6. Okay, a negative divided by a negative is positive. 6 divided by 6 is 1. So my answer there should be +1. +1. All right. Any questions about those? Now you notice I do division using a fraction bar. Again, you're going to do that 99% of the time in algebra. Okay, what if I had this? What if I had 0 divided by -8? It's 0. What if I had -8 divided by 0? Okay, what's -8 divided by 0? Tricking you up here. Have y'all never asked Siri what's 0 divided by 0?
Oh, yes, it is letters.
What does it say?
It says like 0 divided by 0 is impossible. Say that you have 0 friends and that you have 0.
You can't do it. I'm just trying to trick you. It's undefined. You're not going to have a problem like that. I'm just throwing it out there, you know. Trying to make you smarter. Can never divide by 0. Okay, so we just got finished looking at our multiplication and division sign rules. Now the other two operations that we need to learn are our addition and subtraction sign rules. And like I said, I teach these second because these are more difficult. Okay, so when you were multiplying and dividing, you had to just know what are the signs of the numbers, and you had to know what the answer is. It's one step. These, you have 3 steps you have to do before you can answer them. Now, I think that these are going to be, I think that I explained it similar to how you learned it last year, but it may be a little different too, okay? So, I don't know for sure, and nobody's giving me a really great answer all day. But if you're really good at doing this without my rules, that's fine. Do it your way. But I would say more people are probably struggling a little bit with it. If you think you're struggling with it, then you may want to learn these new rules. And either way, it's going to be really similar to what you already know. So I've got 3 rules that I go by. The first rule, I'm just going to explain them first, and then we'll talk about each one in detail. So you probably want to copy these down. First rule is make sure each number has only one sign. So a number cannot have more than one sign. Okay? Every number can only be positive or negative. It can't have 2 signs in front of it. That's bad when that happens. Okay? The second thing we want to do, the second step, is we're going to ask ourselves this question every time. Do the 2 numbers I'm looking at, do they have the same signs, or do they have different signs? And so we'll ask ourselves that question. And then I'm going to say step 3. I'm going to say that's where you execute. That's where you're going to have to carry out whatever number 2 tells you to do. Because if you say they have the same signs, you've got a rule for that. If you say they've got different signs, you've got a rule for that. All right, and they're different. The rules are. So execute. Okay, so number 1. What was our first rule we had to do back there? Make sure
Each number
has only one sign. Make sure each number has only one sign. So let's look at some examples and let's determine if these examples have at least or have one sign or if they have too many. Okay, so what about this? If I told you the number 4, how many signs does it have? Can you see that one sign? Okay, so this is the thing. You can't see it, but is it there? What is the number 4? It's positive. So even though we cannot see the sign, we understand that 4 is positive. So it has one sign with it. So that means the number 4 would work. It has one sign. That's a little tricky when you can't see it. All right, what about this one? What about -3? How many signs does it have? 1. So can I use that? I can. That works. Okay, what about, let's say, if I had +2? How many signs does that have?
1.
It only has 1. This time it's visible though. All right? So that one's good. Those are the 3 examples that work. If we have that, then we're good with step 1. All right? So what are some things that could look wrong? Okay, what if I had something like this? What if I had, what did you say? Plus a -3. How many signs does that have? 2. It has 2 signs. So that right there would not work the way it is currently. I'm going to have to fix that. All right, and I'm fixing to show you how to fix it. All right, another example that you would have to fix. If you had something like minus a -8. That's bad, okay? Because it has 2 negatives. It has 2 signs in front of it. So I got to fix that. And then sometimes they don't put parentheses, okay? So sometimes you could see something like minus -3 like that, right? That doesn't work either. But just know they don't always put parentheses. Anything that has, so what if I had 3 signs? That'd be no good either, all right? But for the most part, you're only going to see them with 2 signs. Okay, so what do we do when a number has more than one sign? So, for example, we had, what was your example, plus negative 3?
Yes.
I've got to fix that to where it only has one sign in front of it. So when you have plus and minus in front of the 3, what one sign can I rewrite that as? I need a set of rules to tell me what it should be. Well, guess what? For this, it's the same rules as your multiplication and division. So what happens when you multiply a positive times a negative? It's a negative. So guess what? When there's a plus and a minus in front of a number, you can rewrite that as just a minus. All right? What if you had minus a negative 8? That has two signs in front of it. What happens when you have minus a negative? You can rewrite that as plus 8. Yeah, absolutely. Those mean the same thing. Minus negative 8 is the same thing as adding 8. And the last one was like minus negative 3. Same thing, two negatives in front of it. I can rewrite that as positive 3 plus 3. Absolutely. Absolutely. Next let's look at step 2. So step 2 is where we ask ourselves the question, do the numbers have the same signs or do they have different signs? Okay? So let's pretend like we're looking at a few problems here. If I had 5 minus 9, does each one of those numbers have only one sign? Yes. Are those signs the same or are they different? What's the sign of the 5? Positive. Even though we can't see it, the sign of the 5 is positive. What's the sign of the 9? Negative. So are those the same or different? They're different. So the answer here would be those are different. So I'll tell you what to do then when they're different. Okay? We'll do that in just a second. What if I had negative 8 plus 7? Those numbers have the same sign or different signs? The 8 has what sign? The 7 has what sign? Are those the same or different? All right, don't make this more complicated than it is. Okay, what if I had this? Negative 1 minus 2. Those numbers have the same sign. They're both negative. Does that make sense? What if I had this? Negative 5 minus negative 2. That stump you? What do we have to do before we do this step?
Negative and a negative. It's plus 2.
The first thing we have to do, before we can ask same signs are different, we have to make sure each number has one sign. So the 5 has one sign. The 2 has, I got to fix that before I can ever ask the question. So when I have minus and negative 2, how can I rewrite that? Sorry, I clicked the wrong thing. I can rewrite a negative as plus 2. So if I rewrite this, now it's easier to tell. Do those numbers have the same sign or different signs? They're different. Let's do one more. If you had 5 minus negative 3, we can rewrite that as what? 5 plus 3, absolutely, because minus negative 3 means plus 3, and those have the same sign. So do you see how we answer that question? Same signs are different. In order to answer it, though, you have to make sure each number only has one sign. And now here's what to do once you answer that question. All right? If I have the same signs, you're going to add the numbers and keep that sign. So when I look at two different numbers and they have the same sign, and I'm told to add them, right? This is only when we're adding or subtracting. That's the only time we use these rules, are for adding and subtracting. If they are being added and they have the same signs, I add the numbers and I keep that sign. Okay, so let's do some examples like that. So our same sign examples. What did we have? We had -8. I don't know, I'm just making them up again. -8 minus 5. Do those numbers have the same signs or different? Same. So we need to add those numbers. So what do you get when you add 8 and 5? 8 and 5, be careful. There we go, 13. Same sign, we add those numbers and keep the sign. What's the sign that they share?
Negative.
So -8 minus 5 should be -13. All right, what if you had 4 minus -3? First thing I need to do, that 3 has two signs. So I fix it. I can rewrite this as 4 plus 3. Now, do those numbers have the same signs or different signs? So when they have the same signs, you add the numbers and keep the sign. Positive. So if it's a positive number, we don't have to write the plus in front of it. Right? Especially when it's our final answer. Any questions on those same sign problems? Okay. Now we have different signs. When we answer that and we say they are different signs, we are going to subtract the numbers and we keep the sign of the dominant number. All right? And I used to say larger all the way up till today. Y'all had one of your classmates who said keep the sign of the dominant number. And I really like that better than I like larger number. Because if I were to write two numbers up here, say I were to write 4 and 5, which one of those is larger? 5. What if I were to write 4 and -5? Which one of those is larger? 4 is larger. What if I ask you which one's more dominant, 4 or 5? 5 is. When I say dominant, I want you to think about I took the absolute value of that number. Have y'all done absolute values stuff a little bit? So the absolute value of -5 is +5. So out of those two numbers, the 5 is dominant. So I want you to just think about the sign doesn't matter when you pick the dominant number. Just whichever number you think should be bigger in the positive direction. Okay? We want to keep the sign of that number, the more dominant number. So if I had a problem like 5 minus 11, does each number have one sign? Yes. Do they have the same signs or different signs? Different. So different signs, we want to subtract the numbers. So if you subtract 5 and 11, what do you get? 6. And then keep the sign of the dominant number. Which one is dominant, 5 or 11? 11 is dominant, and its sign is negative. So we keep its sign. -6. Okay, let's look at one more example. If I were to have -6 plus 7, make sure each number has one sign. They do. Do those numbers have the same signs or different signs? Different. So subtract the numbers. You subtract 6 and 7, you get 1. Keep the sign of the larger number or the more dominant number. Which one is more dominant? The 7. It's positive, so your answer is positive.